What happens when a man who has everything realizes he has nothing at all? Edward Ned Harrington was the dream everyone envied: handsome, powerful, the 38-year-old tech mogul whose face graced magazine covers. He dated models, attended glittering galas, and lived in a Seattle penthouse with a view of the world at his feet. But behind the tailored suits and million-dollar smile, there was a man quietly drowning in loneliness. Then came Clara Mitchell. She wasn't a model, or a socialite, or anyone the tabloids cared about. She was his secretary Quirky, sharp-witted, sometimes clumsy, always real, and in a single moment, with a crooked smile and an unexpected joke, she cracked open the polished shell he had worn for years. But could a man trapped by image truly choose authenticity? Could a woman who had known struggle trust a billionaire who lived under constant flashbulbs? And when the worlds of power and simplicity collided, what would survive, the performance or the truth? Stay with us as we follow their journey of mistakes and forgiveness, of quiet laughter and burning questions, of a love that dared to be different. If this story touches you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories. Now, let's begin. Edward Ned Harrington stood at the window of his 32nd floor penthouse, a glass of red wine in his hand. The lights of Seattle shimmered beneath him, streets pulsing with cars. The glimmer of Puget Sound in the distance, the needle of the Space Needle standing proud against the evening sky. By all outward accounts, Ned had it all. At 38, he was the CEO of a technology empire that shaped how millions of people connected every day. His company's logo was plastered on billboards, streaming platforms, even airport lounges. Forbes had called him a visionary. Fortune listed him among the top 40 under 40, and glossy magazines didn't hesitate to put his face on the cover, labeling him Seattle's most eligible bachelor. He looked the part, too tall, broad-shouldered, with a square jaw that photographers loved. His wardrobe was a rotation of hand-tailored suits, Italian leather shoes, and silk ties that caught the light just enough to say, "I'm important." Women noticed. In fact, for years. His companions had been women. Most men only dreamed of models with cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass. Actresses whose smiles lit up entire movie screens. Influencers with millions of adoring followers. But behind the flawless exterior, Ned carried a silence no one else could see. That evening, as the city below bustled with life, his apartment felt cavernous. The marble counters gleamed, untouched. The modern furniture looked more like a showroom than a home. In the kitchen, a meal from a private chef sat in its container on the counter, growing cold. Instead of reheating it, Ned had chosen the easier option: a glass of wine and a few crackers. Eating alone had become habit, though he hated to admit it. The truth was, Ned couldn't remember the last time he'd sat across from someone who asked him about his day without expecting something in return. Conversations at parties were rehearsed. What's your next product launch? Ned. Who designed your suit? Ned. Which actress are you bringing to the gala this year? Ned. He played the role, smiling, answering with practiced charm. But afterward, when the camera stopped flashing and the cars drove off, he returned to silence. He had once believed success would fill the hollow spaces left behind by loss. His father's sudden death 15 years ago had thrust him into leadership far sooner than expected. He was just 23, still finishing grad school, when the board insisted he take over Harrington Dynamics. Overnight, he had become not just a man, but an empire. He didn't have time to grieve, didn't have time to stumble. He put on the mask of the confident executive, and soon it became permanent. But masks are heavy. In the privacy of his penthouse, Ned sometimes walked from room to room just to hear his own footsteps. The echo reminded him he was still alive, still moving, though some days he questioned what for. On his phone, dozens of unread messages blinked invites to yacht parties in Miami, charity galas in New York, ski trips in Aspen. Most came with a promise of companionship. She'll be there, Ned. You'll love her. Beautiful women, carefully curated by friends and agents who believed appearances were everything. He had dated many of them, women who looked dazzling in gowns, who leaned against him for photographs, who laughed too loudly at his jokes. But once the events ended, once the champagne glasses were emptied, he realized he could not recall what they had spoken about, if they had spoken at all. He remembered, with a dull ache, one evening when a model had left his apartment after a glossy weekend together. She'd forgotten her perfume bottle on the dresser. For weeks after, the scent lingered, clinging to his shirts, the curtains, even the hallways. It wasn't love he missed, it was the illusion of presence, the reminder that, for a moment, someone else had filled the air. The media painted Ned as a man who had conquered life, but standing barefoot in his kitchen at 9 p.m., swirling his glass of Cabernet, he felt less like a conqueror and more like a prisoner of expectations. He thought about calling his mother, who lived a quiet life in Oregon now, surrounded by her rose garden. But it was late. She would ask if he was eating enough, if he was resting. He would say yes. She would hear the lie, but let it pass. She always did. A notification buzzed on his phone. Another invitation, another glittering evening. He placed the phone face down on the counter. He walked to the dining table, large enough to seat 12, and sat at the head. His plate was empty. For a moment, he imagined what it would be like if someone sat across from him, someone who didn't care about Forbes lists or gala tickets, someone who wasn't perfect on the outside but brought warmth into the room. He tried to summon a face, but all that came was a blur. Loneliness crept in like a tide, steady and relentless. Ned pressed the heel of his hand against his forehead, exhaling slowly. He reminded himself that this was the life he had chosen, or at least the life expected of him. There was no turning back. And yet, a whisper inside him asked, what if the man who had it all didn't actually need more accolades, more events, more flawless faces at his side? What if he needed something else entirely? Something so ordinary it terrified him. He set down his wineglass and looked once more at the city lights. From up here, the world sparkled, but inside, he was still in the dark. Edward Harrington had learned to measure people quickly. In his world, time was money, and impressions were currency. But when Clara Mitchell first walked into his office 3 months ago, he hadn't known what to make of her. She wasn't what his former assistants had been. There were no designer heels clicking against the marble floor, no polished nails tapping impatiently on a phone screen, no stiff smile practiced in a mirror. Clara was different. She had walked in wearing a navy cardigan over a simple blouse, carrying a second-hand leather satchel that looked as though it had traveled more miles than she had. Her hair was chestnut brown, pulled into a ponytail that seemed to have been tied in a rush, with a few rebellious strands falling across her face. She wore glasses not the sleek, frameless kind, but round ones that made her look just slightly like a college student who had wandered into the wrong building. And yet, when she looked at Ned, her eyes were steady, hazel, clear, and unafraid. The board had insisted on hiring her after the previous secretary, a glamorous socialite, had quit mid-flight on the company jet, declaring the job too demanding. Clara, by contrast, had no ties to the social circles Ned normally moved in. She had been an administrative assistant in a mid-sized law firm before applying, and according to HR, her references were glowing. But what had really intrigued the board was her reputation organized to a fault, unflappable under pressure, and, one note scribbled almost as an afterthought, a bit quirky. At first, Ned kept his distance. He assumed Clara would either adapt to his world or quickly burn out. But she surprised him. Clara had a way of running his office that didn't just manage the chaos, it softened it. She organized his calendar with ruthless efficiency, yet she left sticky notes with doodles of coffee mugs or umbrellas on days with heavy meetings. She reminded him to eat lunch, often dropping a granola bar on his desk with the kind of mock sternness that made him smile despite himself. And she never once seemed intimidated by the weight of his name. If anything, she seemed amused by it. The first time she made him laugh, truly laugh, came on a Tuesday afternoon in late March. The day had started badly. He had overslept after another restless night, snapped at his driver for taking a longer route, and walked into the office to find 3 urgent memos waiting. By noon, his mood was fraying. That was when Clara knocked on his office door. "Mr. Harrington," she said, stepping inside with unusual urgency. "Do you realize what day it is?" Ned glanced at his laptop screen. "Tuesday," he muttered, scrolling through emails. "It's your mother's birthday?" Clara said. The words hit him like a slap. He froze, then checked his phone. There it was, his calendar, filled with shareholder meetings and investor calls, but no reminder about the one person who should never have slipped his mind. His chest tightened with guilt. His mother, Elaine, was the only steady figure in his life since his father's death. She had been his anchor, his quiet voice of wisdom when the world demanded too much. And he had forgotten her birthday. Ned began, but the words tangled in his throat. Clara didn't scold him. Instead, she smiled, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "Lucky for you, I bake under stress." Before he could respond, she placed a medium-sized cake box on his desk. The aroma of chocolate and cinnamon filled the room as she opened it, revealing a homemade cake, frosted in simple swirls and topped with a scattering of strawberries. "I figured you'd forget," she said lightly. "CEOs are allergic to family dates. So, I made this last night, just in case." Ned stared at the cake, speechless. "You baked this? Don't sound so shocked," Clara replied, crossing her arms with mock indignation. "Some of us learned real-life skills instead of how to order imported truffles." Her tone was teasing, not disrespectful, but it caught him off guard. For a moment, he simply blinked at her. Then something rare happened. His lips curved, and before he could stop it, laughter escaped him. It wasn't the polite chuckle he gave investors. It wasn't the charming laugh he used at galas. It was real, unpolished, warm. It startled him almost as much as it startled her. Clara tilted her head, pretending to examine him like a specimen. "Wow, he can laugh. Should I call HR and report this miracle?" Ned shook his head, still chuckling. "You're impossible." "Impossible is just another word for memorable," she replied with a grin. For the rest of the day, something shifted. The weight of deadlines didn't seem so crushing. His calls with shareholders went smoother. Even the endless stream of emails felt less suffocating. Every time he thought about the cake sitting in the break room, he felt an unfamiliar warmth stir in his chest. That evening, as he prepared to leave, he passed Clara's desk. She was scribbling notes in her planner, her glasses slipping down her nose. "Thank you," he said quietly. She looked up, surprised. "For the cake, for the reminder," he clarified. His voice was low, sincere. "And for today," Clara smiled, not with the polished charm of someone angling for praise, but with the ease of a person who meant it. "You're welcome, Mr. Harrington. Just don't make a habit of forgetting your mother. I don't have time to be your conscience and your secretary." Ned almost laughed again. Instead, he nodded, slipping into his coat, but as he stepped into the elevator, he realized something extraordinary had happened. In all his years of wealth, success, and glittering company, no one had ever given him something so simple, so ordinary, yet so meaningful: a cake, a reminder, and a laugh. And for the first time in a long while, Edward Harrington wondered if perhaps the world still held surprises for him. The morning began with a hiss, a sputter, and then a dreadful silence. Ned Harrington stood in his kitchen, staring at the Italian espresso machine that had been his lifeline for years. It had been custom ordered from Milan, polished steel with dials that looked more like an aircraft cockpit than a household appliance. For as long as he could remember, it had produced the only coffee he trusted: rich, dark, consistent. Now it sat lifeless. Ned pressed the buttons again. Nothing. He unplugged it, plugged it back in. Nothing. For a man who managed billions in assets, he was oddly helpless in the face of a dead espresso machine. By the time he reached the office, his mood was sour. Clara noticed immediately. "Good morning," she greeted as he strode past her desk. Or, should I say, not so good. "The machine's broken," Ned muttered, dropping into his chair. Clara blinked. "Machine my espresso machine," he clarified, as if speaking of a family member in distress. Clara bit back a smile. "Ah, a caffeine crisis. The tragedy of our times." He shot her a look, but she was already standing, grabbing her coat. "Come on," she said. "Where to save your life?" she replied matter-of-factly. "I know a place." Before he could protest, she was holding the elevator door open, waiting for him like a school teacher waiting for a stubborn student, against his better judgment. He followed. 20 minutes later, they stood outside a modest coffee shop tucked into a quiet corner of West Seattle. It wasn't the kind of place Ned ever visited. The sign was hand-painted, the windows cluttered with flyers for local bands and neighborhood book clubs. A chalkboard outside listed the day's specials in bright, uneven letters. "This," Clara declared, "is civilization. Inside, the air smelled of roasted beans and cinnamon. The walls were decorated with mismatched art photographs, children's drawings, and an oversized clock that seemed permanently stuck at 2:10. Students hunched over laptops. A couple of construction workers sipped lattes at a corner table. A barista with blue hair and a pierced eyebrow nodded at Clara in recognition. "You come here often?" Ned asked, his voice low. "Every morning," Clara said proudly. "Best coffee in the city. And don't worry, they won't bite the Millionaire." He frowned at her teasing, but it was difficult to ignore the warmth in her tone. They joined the short line. Ned scanned the menu above the counter, his brow furrowed. "Clara," he whispered, "what is a flat white?" She smirked. "Milk, espresso, magic, and a cortado. Less milk, more punch, cold brew, coffee on steroids." Ned rubbed his temple. "Why does coffee need so many names?" Clara leaned closer, whispering just loud enough for the barista to hear. "Because some people like to feel fancy holding paper cups." The barista chuckled. Ned stiffened, feeling out of place. When it was Clara's turn, she ordered with ease. Medium oat milk latte, extra cinnamon. The barista nodded, the usual. Then came Ned's turn. The menu still looked like a foreign language. He cleared his throat. "I'll have coffee." The barista raised an eyebrow. "Hot iced drip Americano." Ned hesitated. "A hot, black." "That's drip," the barista said, already pouring. Clara tried not to laugh, but her shoulders shook. They carried their drinks to a small table by the window. Ned examined his paper cup suspiciously. It felt flimsy compared to the porcelain mugs he used at home. He took a sip and coughed. "This tastes burnt." Clara sipped hers with satisfaction. "That's character. You've been spoiled by imported beans and machines with Italian accents." Ned gave her a look. "This is water with regrets." She burst out laughing, nearly spilling her latte. "Oh, come on, it's not that bad." But what startled Ned wasn't the taste of the coffee, it was the laughter, not hers, his own. He realized he was smiling again, genuinely, for the second time in weeks. There was something absurdly freeing about sitting in a small cafe, sipping a bitter coffee from a paper cup, and watching Clara grin at him like he was just another customer. Not a CEO, not a headline, just a man who didn't know his way around a coffee menu. For a long moment, he let himself be that man. As they sat there, the morning rush picked up. Students rushed in, ordering with rapid-fire confidence. A young mother soothed her toddler with a muffin. The barista greeted people by name. Ned felt invisible. And strangely, he liked it. Clara leaned back in her chair, studying him. "You know, this is the first time I've seen you look normal." "Normal?" he echoed, slightly offended. "Yes." "You're not in a suit of armor," she said, gesturing at his pressed shirt and polished shoes. "You're just Ned, trying to figure out drip coffee. It suits you." He tilted his head, considering her words. "And you seem very at home here." "I am," she said simply. "Places like this remind me life isn't about headlines or boardrooms. It's about small things like the way cinnamon makes coffee taste like Christmas, or how the barista remembers your name after the second visit. Ned followed her gaze to the counter, where the blue-haired barista was joking with a group of teenagers. It struck him how different this world was from the galas and skyscrapers he lived in, and for the first time, he wondered which world actually mattered more. He took another sip, grimacing, still burnt. Clara laughed again, shaking her head. One day, Ned, you'll learn to appreciate imperfection. He looked at her, curious. And you? Have you? Her eyes softened, just for a moment. Every day. The answer lingered between them, richer than any espresso. When they finally left the cafe, Ned carried the empty paper cup with him, almost reluctant to toss it away. He caught his reflection in the glass door as it closed behind them. For once, he didn't see the millionaire CEO. He just saw a man who had laughed in a coffee shop with his secretary. And oddly enough, that man felt more real than the one on magazine covers. The Harrington Foundation Gala was the event of the season, each year. Seattle's elite gathered in the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Olympic Hotel, where chandeliers glittered above polished marble floors and violins played softly from a corner stage. The city's wealthiest arrived in sleek black cars, dressed in gowns and tuxedos that cost more than most people earned in a month. Ned had attended countless galas in his life. He usually walked in with a model on his arm, someone who looked perfect in photographs, but rarely spoke more than a handful of rehearsed lines during the evening. Tonight, however, was different. Tonight. Clara Mitchell walked beside him. When she had first received the invitation, Clara had laughed. Me at a gala. You're joking. I'm not, Ned had replied. You've earned it. Besides, I could use someone who isn't impressed by chandeliers. She had rolled her eyes, but something in his steady tone had softened her resistance. Now, as she stepped out of the car, all conversation seemed to pause. Clara wore a deep green dress, simple in cut but elegant in its lines. It wasn't designer couture, but it suited her perfectly, graceful without trying too hard, honest without apology. Her hair was swept back loosely, with a few strands framing her face, and she wore small silver earrings that caught the light. Next to the glittering gowns and diamond necklaces of the other women, she looked almost understated. And yet, there was something about her presence calm, assured, quietly radiant that drew the eye more than any sequins could. Ned noticed it immediately. So did everyone else. Inside the ballroom, waiters carried trays of champagne, and photographers circled like hawks. The moment Ned and Clara stepped in, the flash of cameras lit up the room. Clara stiffened, clutching her small clutch bag a little tighter. They're just doing their job, Ned murmured, leaning close. Ignore them. That's easy for you to say, she whispered back. You're used to this. I feel like a fish on a plate. He almost laughed at the description, but he could see her unease. He placed a steady hand at the small of her back, guiding her forward. They made their way through the crowd, greeted by business leaders and politicians who shook Ned's hand with practiced warmth. But as their eyes flicked toward Clara, their smiles faltered, some curious, some skeptical, others thinly veiled with disdain. One woman, in a glittering silver gown, leaned toward another, whispering just loud enough to be overheard. His secretary. Really? Clara's cheeks flushed. She tried to keep her gaze straight ahead, but the weight of the stairs pressed on her shoulders. She wasn't blind. She saw the way people measured her dress, her posture, her every move, as though she were a puzzle piece forced into the wrong picture. During dinner, the tension sharpened. At their table sat several of Ned's old acquaintances, a senator, a venture capitalist, and Veronica Langley, a socialite who had once been on his arm at this very gala. Veronica was dazzling in crimson silk, her laughter ringing out like crystal. She studied Clara with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. So, Clara, Veronica said sweetly. However did you meet Ned? Clara hesitated, caught between politeness and honesty. At the office, she said simply. Veronica's smile widened. Of course. How quaint, the senator's wife chimed in, tilting her head. And what do you do? Dear. Besides, well, keeping Ned's schedule. Clara felt the sting in her words. She opened her mouth, but Ned spoke first. She does more than keep my schedule, he said, his voice firm but calm. She keeps my life from collapsing. The table quieted. Ned's gaze swept across them, steady and unyielding. Clara has more wit and intelligence than half the people I know in this room, and unlike most of us, she doesn't wear masks. That's why she's here with me. Clara froze. The words were simple, but the conviction in his tone silenced even Veronica. The air around the table shifted, uncomfortable but undeniable. For a moment, Clara couldn't breathe. She had walked into this ballroom expecting to feel like a misplaced shadow, but now, in front of everyone, Ned had chosen to place her in the light. The evening carried on with the usual speeches and auctions, but Clara's world felt altered. She still noticed the stares, the whispers, but they no longer pierced her as deeply. She sat taller, her chin lifted, emboldened by the quiet strength at her side. Later, as they slipped onto the balcony for air, Clara leaned against the railing, looking out at the city lights. I wasn't ready for that, she admitted softly. The way they looked at me as if I didn't belong. You do belong, Ned said simply. She turned to him, eyes searching. Do you really believe that? Or were you just playing knight in shining armor at the dinner table? Ned's expression softened, but his voice was steady. Clara, I don't play games. You belong because you're real. That's rarer in this room than all the diamonds combined. For a long moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the faint music drifting from inside. Clara felt the cool night air brush against her skin, mingling with the warmth that rose from his words. And for the first time that evening, she smiled, not the polite smile she'd worn through introductions, but her own, genuine, slightly crooked smile, the one Ned had secretly come to treasure. Inside, cameras still flashed, and whispers still spread. But out here, under the city sky, Clara realized something important. She didn't need to look like she belonged to anyone else's world. As long as she was herself, and as long as Ned kept seeing her the way he just had, maybe that was enough. The gala had ended hours ago, but Ned couldn't sleep. He sat in the dark of his penthouse, tie loosened, jacket discarded over the arm of a chair. The city outside was alive with night traffic, but inside, the silence pressed on him like a weight. He replayed the evening in his mind, the stares, the whispers, Clara's nervous smile, his own sharp defense at the dinner table. He had stood up for her. Yes. But as the adrenaline faded, a different thought crept in. Who was I really standing up for? Was it for Clara, or for the part of himself that was exhausted by the masks, the performances, the endless parade of perfect evenings filled with empty conversations? He rubbed his face with both hands, leaning forward until his elbows rested on his knees. For years, he had told himself this was success, the suits, the covers, the applause. But now, the cracks in that definition were spreading wider than he could ignore. Am I happy? The question startled him. He had never allowed himself to ask it, not seriously. Happiness was a luxury, wasn't it? Something ordinary people chased. He had responsibilities, a company, a reputation. His life wasn't about happiness. It was about achievement. And yet, in the quiet, he admitted a truth that made his chest ache. He wasn't happy. The thought sat in him like a stone. He thought of the espresso machine breaking, the absurdity of standing in that little cafe with Clara. He thought of the cake she had made for his mother, and how he had laughed a real laugh, one that hadn't felt rehearsed. He thought of the way she had looked tonight, out of place in her simple green dress, yet somehow more authentic than anyone else in the room. Clara. The name lingered in his mind like a whisper of light in a dark room. The next morning, Clara found him at his desk earlier than usual, staring at the skyline through the glass walls. He hadn't touched his coffee. Rough night? She asked gently, setting a folder on his desk. He didn't look at her right away. Clara, Do you ever wonder if you're living the wrong life? She tilted her head, curious. Define wrong. He sighed. On paper, I have everything. Success, wealth, recognition. But sometimes I feel like I'm walking through a play. Every room I enter, I put on a role. The confident CEO, the charming bachelor, the man who has it all. But when the curtain drops, when I'm alone, he trailed off, pressing his lips together. You feel hollow. Clara finished softly. His eyes flicked to hers, surprised by her bluntness. Clara pulled up a chair, sitting across from him. Ned, I've been here 3 months, and I've watched you. You move through your day like a soldier following orders. Meetings, calls, events. You do it all perfectly. But perfection isn't life. It's a mask. He frowned. So, what am I supposed to do? Drop everything and run away? No, Clara said. But maybe stop performing all the time. Stop trying to live up to everyone's idea of Edward Harrington. Just be Ned. He almost laughed at that. And what does Ned even look like? She leaned back, studying him with that steady gaze of hers. He looks like the man who didn't know how to order coffee, who laughed so hard he nearly spilled it. He looks like the man who remembered his mother's birthday because he cared, not because it was penciled into his calendar. That Ned, he's real, he's human, and he's a lot more interesting than the one in the magazines. For a moment, the silence between them deepened. Ned felt her words sink past his defenses, pressing against the doubts he had tried to ignore. I don't know if I can, he admitted quietly. Clara smiled, not unkindly. You don't have to know yet. You just have to start. Later that day, during a board meeting, Ned caught himself drifting. The executives around the table droned on about projections, partnerships, stock value. Their voices blended into a monotone hum. He looked around at their suits, their polished words, and suddenly saw not power, but performance. He wondered how many of them were secretly hollow too. When the meeting ended, he didn't return immediately to his office. Instead, he walked to the rooftop terrace. The air was crisp. The city spread wide before him. He closed his eyes, letting the wind sting his face, and whispered to himself, "Stop performing." The words felt strange, like a foreign language, but they also felt like a promise. That evening, as he left the building, Clara caught up with him. "You seemed quiet today," she observed, "just thinking." "Dangerous habit," she teased lightly. He gave her a tired smile. "Clara, do you ever feel like the life you want is just beyond reach all the time?" she said, surprising him with her honesty. "But you reach anyway. Because what's the alternative, settling for a mask?" Her words struck him again, sharp but true. He realized then that Clara didn't just organize his schedule. She organized his thoughts, his chaos, his doubts. She named truths he had been too afraid to say aloud. And for the first time, Ned felt the possibility of change flicker inside him, not as a distant dream, but as a choice he might actually make. As they stood together under the fading evening light, Ned glanced at Clara, her expression calm, her quirky smile softening the edges of his world. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to find out who he really was. The air around Lake Washington carried the crisp scent of pine and fresh water. The surface rippled with the occasional breeze, turning sunlight into shards of silver that danced across the waves. For Ned, it was a rare moment of quiet. No boardrooms, no cameras, no headlines, just the soft crunch of gravel underfoot as he and Clara walked side by side along the path. It had been her idea. You need air. She had insisted when she saw the exhaustion etched into his face. Not the recycled kind from your penthouse. The real thing. Now, with his hands tucked in his coat pockets, Ned admitted she had been right. The stillness of the lake pressed a calmness into him that he hadn't felt in years. They walked for a while without speaking, listening to the sound of children laughing on a nearby playground, the distant call of geese, the lapping of water against the shore. Finally, Clara broke the silence. "You grew up around here, didn't you?" Ned nodded. Bellevue, just across the bridge. Back then, this lake felt endless to me, like an ocean. He paused, a faint smile tugging at his lips. My dad used to bring me fishing out here on Saturday mornings. I never caught anything. He always did. Clara glanced at him. Maybe he let you think you were unlucky so you'd keep coming. The thought warmed him. He hadn't considered that before. His voice softened as he continued. He died when I was 23. Heart attack. It was sudden. One day I was a business student with plans to work in finance. The next, I was the heir to Harrington Technologies. The words hung between them, heavy with memory. I thought I'd have years to prepare, Ned said, eyes fixed on the water. But the board wanted a Harrington at the helm, and I stepped up. At least, that's what everyone called it, stepping up. Truth was, I was terrified. I didn't feel ready. But I put on the mask, and I never really took it off. Clara's steps slowed. She studied his profile, the strong lines of his face softened by something vulnerable. That's a lot to carry at 23. He gave a half shrug. I didn't have a choice. They walked in silence for a few paces before Clara spoke again. Her tone quiet but steady. My dad didn't die, but he might as well have. He walked out when I was 12. My mom worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat. She cleaned houses during the day, waited tables at night. I helped with my younger brother packed his lunches, got him to school. By the time I graduated, there was no money left for college. I took the first job I could get. Her voice carried no bitterness, only a kind of pragmatic acceptance. I wanted to study literature, she admitted, her eyes lifting toward the trees. Not exactly practical, I know, but books were my escape, still are. They made me believe there was more than bills and shifts and making sure the lights stayed on. Ned looked at her, truly looked. For all the differences in their lives, the penthouse and the paycheck-to-paycheck apartment, the boardrooms and the break rooms, he saw the same thread responsibility forced on them too soon. Clara, he said softly, you sacrificed your dream for your family. She shook her head. No, I chose them. That's different, and I don't regret it. But, she trailed off, a wistful smile brushing her lips. Sometimes I wonder who I might have been if life had turned out differently. The breeze carried the faint scent of cedar as they continued along the path. Ned's chest tightened with something he couldn't quite name: admiration, sorrow, connection, maybe all of it. I envy you, he said after a moment. Her brow arched. Me? Why, because you know who you are, he explained. You've lived without masks. You've been honest about what life gave you, and you haven't tried to pretend. I've been pretending so long, I don't know where the mask ends and I begin. Clara stopped walking. She turned to face him, her hazel eyes catching the light of the lake. Ned, do you really think you're the only one who wears masks? I wore one too, every time I smiled at a customer when I wanted to cry from exhaustion. Every time I acted like I wasn't scared about the rent. The difference is, my mask didn't make magazine covers. The honesty of her words pierced him. For a long moment, they simply stood there, 2 people from different worlds, their reflections rippling together on the water. Then Clara's expression softened. But here's the thing, Ned, you don't have to keep wearing yours. Not with me. The weight of that promise sank deep. He hadn't realized until now how much he needed to hear it. They resumed walking, slower this time. The path curved closer to the water, where ducks floated lazily. Ned bent to pick up a smooth stone and tossed it across the surface. It skipped once, twice, then sank. Not bad, Clara said. My dad could skip them 6 times, Ned murmured. She bent down, found her own stone, and with a flick of her wrist sent it dancing across the water 5 times before it disappeared. She turned with a triumphant grin. Ned stared at her, then laughed deep, unguarded laughter that startled even him. For the rest of the walk, the heaviness between them lightened. They talked about small things, her favorite childhood books, his disastrous attempt to cook pasta in college, the dog she once adopted that turned out to belong to a neighbor. The sun dipped lower, painting the lake in hues of orange and gold. As they reached the end of the path, Clara looked at him thoughtfully. You know, Ned, we're not so different. He raised an eyebrow. You think so? She nodded. We both had to grow up too soon. We both learned how to survive. And maybe... She hesitated, then finished softly. Maybe now it's time we learn how to live. The word struck him like a stone skipping across his chest, leaving ripples behind. For the first time in years, Edward Harrington felt the possibility that life could be more than responsibility, more than performance. Maybe, standing by this lake with Clara Mitchell, life could finally be real. The newspaper headline landed on Ned's desk with the force of a grenade. Seattle's golden CEO and his mysterious secretary. A romance in the making. The article was splashed across the lifestyle section of the Seattle Chronicle, complete with grainy photos taken outside the Fairmont Olympic Hotel. One picture showed Ned and Clara stepping onto the balcony, his hand resting lightly on her back. Another caught them laughing together as they left the gala. The captions, dripping with speculation, painted Clara as a nobody who had somehow captured the attention of the city's most eligible bachelor. Ned groaned, rubbing his temples. He had dealt with media intrusion for years. It was part of the game. But this dragging Clara into it felt different. When she stormed into his office an hour later, clutching the newspaper, he knew he was in trouble. Ned, she said, her voice sharp. Have you seen this? Yes, he replied evenly. I saw it this morning. Her eyes flashed. And you're just calm about it. They called me your mystery secretary. They wrote about what I was wearing, how I smiled, as if I'm some novelty item on your arm. He stood, trying to steady her. Clara, I didn't ask them to write it. That doesn't matter. She shot back. Do you know what it feels like to open a paper and see yourself treated like gossip fodder? Like I'm some little fling to spice up your image. Her words cut deep. He reached for calm, but his patience wavered. The media has always written what they want. You can't take it personally. I can't. Her voice rose. Easy for you to say you're used to this circus. But me, I didn't sign up to be your headline. I didn't ask for cameras to follow me to work. She turned, pacing his office like a caged animal. You should have warned me. You should have told me this would happen the second I stepped into your world. Clara. No. She whirled to face him, her cheeks flushed. Do you even understand how humiliating this is? My coworkers have been whispering all morning. Customers at the coffee shop stared at me like I was some scandal. I'm not just your secretary anymore. I'm your story. The words hit him harder than he expected. He opened his mouth, searching for the right thing to say, but frustration flared instead. What do you want me to do? Clara, call the papers and demand a retraction that will only fuel it further. I want you to see how this feels for me, she shouted, her voice cracking. I'm not your arm candy. Ned, I'm not some entertainment for bored reporters. And right now, that's exactly how I feel. The silence after her words was deafening. Ned's jaw tightened. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that she was more than that, but the words caught. Because the truth was, the media didn't see her the way he did. To them, she was just a curiosity, and he hated that he couldn't shield her from it. Her breathing slowed, but her eyes stayed hard. Maybe this was a mistake, she said quietly. Maybe our worlds really don't fit. Ned felt something sink inside him. Don't say that. But she was already heading for the door. She paused with her hand on the handle, her back to him. I need space. Ned, I can't do this right now. The door closed behind her with a finality that made his chest ache. The hours that followed dragged like days. Ned tried to focus on work, but numbers blurred on the screen. His calls were distracted. Every thought circled back to her words. I'm not your arm candy. I'm not your story. He replayed the scene in his mind, wishing he had said something different, done something different. He had stood in boardrooms with billion-dollar deals at stake and never felt this helpless. That evening, his driver asked if he wanted to be taken home. Ned shook his head. Just drive. The car wound through the city streets. He saw the glow of restaurants, the laughter spilling from bars, the quiet families gathered at windows. He thought of Clara, her crooked smile, her stubborn honesty, the way she had skipped stones across the lake, and he wondered if she was sitting alone somewhere, regretting every step she had taken beside him. Meanwhile, Clara sat in her small apartment, the newspaper folded tightly on the counter. Her phone buzzed with messages coworkers sending links to online articles. Her brother teasing in texts that didn't feel funny at all. She ignored them. She had lit a single lamp, the rest of the room dim, as if shadows could protect her from the weight of being seen. She wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. Instead, she whispered to the empty room, "I'm not a fling." The words echoed back, hollow but necessary, because deep down, what hurt most wasn't the article. It was the doubt it planted inside her. Was she just an interlude in Ned Harrington's polished life? She pulled her knees to her chest, her heart heavy with fear she couldn't quite name. For the first time since meeting him, she felt the sharp sting of distance. In the days that followed, they barely spoke. Clara kept conversation strictly professional at work. Ned respected her silence, though every clipped word from her cut him. The easy rhythm they had built, the laughter, the shared truths, was fractured. And yet, beneath the silence, something deeper stirred, a recognition that if they wanted to continue, they couldn't remain as they were. The masks had cracked, the world had noticed, and now, both Ned and Clara had to decide whether they were strong enough to face it together or apart. The first day passed in silence. Ned sat at his desk, pretending to read reports. The numbers swam before his eyes, meaningless in their columns and charts. Normally, he would lose himself in the rhythm of strategy, in the precision of decisions. But now, every page felt like sand slipping through his hands. Clara's absence was everywhere. She was still in the office, of course. He heard her voice in the hallway, steady and professional, giving directions to staff. She delivered files to his desk without comment, her expression polite, distant. But it was the silence between them, the absence of her teasing remarks, her sideways smiles that hollowed him out. That evening, as he stood in his penthouse overlooking the city, Ned realized with a clarity that startled him, "I don't want to lose her." The thought repeated like a drumbeat, louder than the hum of traffic below, louder than the clinking of ice in his untouched glass. He had faced competitors, scandals, even family grief, but nothing had unsettled him like Clara walking out of his office, her voice breaking as she said she needed space. The silence of the city pressed in on him, and for the first time in years, Ned felt truly afraid. For Clara, the days dragged like winter. The morning after the article, she had woken to buzzing notifications, texts, emails, even a voicemail from an old friend she hadn't spoken to in years. Everyone wanted to know about Ned Harrington, about her. She wanted to turn her phone off, but she couldn't, not when she needed it for work. At the supermarket near her apartment, she caught two women glancing at her, whispering. At work, colleagues lingered near her desk, asking with feigned curiosity, "So, how was the gala?" Clara forced polite smiles, gave vague answers, and swallowed the sting of humiliation. But the real weight came from inside her. Every night, she sat in her small apartment, staring at the folded newspaper on the counter. The photographs haunted her. Ned with his hand at her back, their laughter frozen in time, now twisted into evidence of something cheap, something scandalous. Part of her heart whispered, "He defended you. He sees you as more than they do." But another voice, sharper, more fearful, countered, "This is his world. To him, headlines are routine. To you, they're a wound. How long before you're just another name in his story?" Clara curled up on her couch, knees to her chest, torn between the warmth she felt when Ned looked at her and the cold fear that she was only temporary. The second day. Ned tried to distract himself with routine. Meetings, calls, reports, it all blurred together. But when he passed Clara in the hallway, her polite nod cut deeper than any sharp word. He caught himself watching her, noticing the way her brow furrowed as she typed, the way her fingers tapped a nervous rhythm on her notebook. She wasn't angry anymore, not outwardly. She was distant, and that distance frightened him more than her anger had. That night, he sat at his dining table with a plate of untouched food. He had never felt more alone in his gleaming apartment. The walls, once symbols of success, now felt like a cage. He whispered to the silence, "Don't let me lose her." Clara spent the second night writing in her old journal, something she hadn't touched in years. Her pen moved furiously across the page, words tumbling faster than she could control. He makes me laugh. He makes me feel seen. But what if it's not real? What if I'm just a distraction, a story he'll forget when the headlines fade? I can't be that. I can't survive being that. She stopped, staring at the page as tears blurred the ink. For years, she had kept her heart safe behind practicality. Relationships came and went, but she never allowed herself to dive too deep. Safety had been her armor. Now, Ned was undoing all of it, and she didn't know whether to hate him for it or to hold on tighter. On the third day, the silence grew unbearable. Ned found himself standing outside Clara's office more than once, hand hovering near the door, only to retreat. He wanted to say something, anything that would bridge the gap, but words, once his weapon, now failed him. That evening, he drove aimlessly, ending up by Lake Washington. The place where he had once shared his past with Clara now mocked him with its serenity. He remembered her words, "Maybe now it's time we learn how to live." He realized then that he hadn't just let the media wound her. He had let his silence wound her more. He pulled out his phone, thumb hovering over her name. But he didn't press call, not yet. Because if she answered, he didn't want to speak from fear. He wanted to speak from truth. That same night, Clara sat by her window, staring at the city lights. She imagined Ned in his penthouse, staring out at the same sky. The thought tightened her chest. Her heart ached with longing. She missed his steady voice, his quiet laughter, the way he listened when she spoke about her past. She missed the Ned who wasn't a headline, the man who had thrown a rock into the lake and admitted he was still searching for himself. But then she remembered the sting of those whispers, the way the world had reduced her to a mystery secretary, as if she were nothing but a curiosity. She whispered into the night, "I don't want to lose him, but I don't want to lose myself either." The words hung in the air, fragile as glass. By the end of the third day, both Ned and Clara found themselves staring at their phones, each hesitating, each afraid. The silence had grown heavy, but within it, something undeniable had crystallized. Neither of them wanted to walk away, but wanting was not the same as knowing how to stay. It was a gray Saturday morning when Ned Harrington found himself wandering through the aisles of a neighborhood grocery store. He didn't usually shop for himself. Assistance and delivery services had long taken care of such details. But this morning, restless and unable to stand the silence of his penthouse, he had driven aimlessly until he ended up at a small market a few blocks from Lake Washington. The store was unremarkable fluorescent lights, squeaky carts, handwritten signs taped to the shelves, but to Ned, it felt oddly grounding. He picked up a basket and walked slowly down the aisles, pretending to compare brands of cereal when, in truth, he simply wanted to feel anonymous. He was halfway down the canned goods section when he heard a voice, sharp, angry. "You call this customer service? What kind of idiot doesn't know how to scan a coupon?" Ned froze. The voice was directed at a cashier near the front registers. And then he saw her, Clara. She stood behind the counter, uniform vest neat, glasses slipping slightly down her nose, her hands steady on the register, even as a red-faced man slammed a box of crackers on the counter. "I've told you 3 times. The price is marked lower on the shelf," the man barked. "But you people just want to rip off honest customers. Typical." Clara tried to remain calm. "Sir, I understand your frustration. Let me call my manager to—" "I don't want your manager," the man interrupted, his voice rising. "I want you to do your job. Can't even handle a simple discount. Huh. Figures?" The words stung even from where Ned stood. He felt his chest tighten, anger simmering. Clara, who had been his anchor in so many storms, was being reduced to nothing by a man throwing a tantrum over 50 cents. Without thinking, Ned set down his basket and walked to the front. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm but firm, cutting through the man's tirade. The customer turned, eyes narrowing. "Who are you?" "Someone who doesn't appreciate seeing decent people treated like garbage," Ned replied evenly. His tone was controlled, but the authority beneath it was undeniable. The man scoffed. "This is none of your business. It became my business the moment you started shouting at her," Ned said, stepping closer. "She's doing her job. If there's an issue, you handle it with respect, not insults." The man bristled, his face reddening further. "You some kind of hero?" Ned's gaze didn't waver. No, just a man who won't stand by while someone else is humiliated. The silence that followed was thick. Other shoppers had begun to watch. The man shifted uncomfortably under their stares. Finally, with a muttered curse, he grabbed his crackers and stormed out, leaving his unpaid groceries behind. Clara stood frozen, hands still on the register. Her heart raced, not from the customer's outburst, but from the quiet steadiness of Ned's voice. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't threatened. He had simply stood up for her. And in that moment, he hadn't looked like the millionaire from glossy magazine covers. He had looked like a man calm, steady, unshakable. When the last of the curious onlookers drifted away, Clara finally exhaled. "You shouldn't be here." Ned allowed the faintest smile. "Good thing I was." She swallowed, her throat tight. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did," he interrupted gently. "No one should speak to you that way. Not ever." Something in his tone, soft yet resolute, disarmed her. For days, she had replayed her fears that she was nothing but a passing curiosity in his world. But here, in this ordinary grocery store, Ned had chosen to step in, not as a CEO, not as a man in a suit, but simply as Ned. Her chest tightened with an unfamiliar warmth. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded. "Always." After her shift ended, Clara found him waiting outside, leaning casually against his car. She sighed, shaking her head. "You really don't know how to stay unnoticed, do you?" He chuckled softly. "Not when you're being yelled at by a man over crackers." Clara crossed her arms, studying him. "Why did you do it?" His brow furrowed. "Because you didn't deserve it. Because no one talks to you like that." She hesitated, searching his face. "You could have walked away. Most people would have." "I'm not most people," he said simply. The words hung between them. She looked at him then, not as the untouchable CEO or the man caught in glossy headlines, but as someone who saw her, who cared enough to act without hesitation. Her defenses wavered. "You know," she said softly, "for a man who forgets birthdays and can't order coffee, you're not half bad." He smiled, a rare, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Coming from you, I'll take that as high praise." Clara felt a laugh bubble up, easing the heaviness that had weighed on her for days. For the first time since the article, the distance between them began to close not with grand gestures, but with something far more powerful: trust. As they stood there under the muted Seattle sky, Clara realized she was seeing Ned differently, not as a headline, not as a fantasy, but as a man with a heart steady enough to step between her and the world when it turned cruel. And for the first time, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't a story to him. She was something more. It was Friday evening when Ned asked her, not in his office, not with his usual polished confidence, but in the most unassuming way possible. He had stopped by Clara's desk as she packed up her things, his hands shoved into his pockets, his voice carrying an unfamiliar hesitation. "There's this little diner I like," he said. "Nothing fancy, just dinner with me." What do you think? Clara blinked. She had expected an invitation to a restaurant where the menu had no prices, where the waiters glided silently like ghosts. Instead, he was offering her something different. A diner. Ordinary. Safe. She smiled faintly. You at a diner. His lips curved, the closest thing to a self-deprecating grin she had ever seen on him. Don't look so surprised. I wasn't always a man who wore suits to breakfast. Curiosity stirred in her chest. Against her better judgment, she said yes. The place was called Marty's Diner, a squat brick building with neon letters that buzzed faintly in the cool Seattle night. A bell jingled as Ned opened the door for her. Inside, the air was filled with the smell of frying bacon and freshly brewed coffee. The booths were upholstered in faded red vinyl, and a jukebox hummed softly in the corner. Clara couldn't help but laugh as she slid into the booth across from him. You're full of surprises. Harrington? Good ones, I hope, he replied, setting aside the menu as if he already knew what he wanted. A waitress in her 50s approached, pad in hand, her smile easy and genuine. What can I get you to tonight? I'll have the cheeseburger, fries, and a vanilla milkshake, Ned said without hesitation. Clara raised her eyebrows. Milkshake? Really? He shrugged. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. She bit back a grin. Fine. Same for me. But make it chocolate. The waitress scribbled it down and bustled away, leaving them in the glow of the neon lights. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Ned leaned back in the booth, studying her with an expression that was softer than she was used to. You know, he said quietly, I don't think I've been to a place like this in years. Why not? Because somewhere along the line, I started believing I wasn't allowed to. He tapped his fingers lightly against the table. CEOs don't eat burgers in diners. They dine at steakhouses, order imported wine, and pretend they enjoy 12-course meals. Clara tilted her head, watching him. And do you enjoy them? He gave a small, rueful smile. Not half as much as I'm enjoying this. Something in her chest shifted. She looked around at the diner, the clatter of dishes, the couple in the booth behind them, laughing over a shared plate of fries, and then back at Ned. For the first time, he seemed ordinary, not diminished, not smaller, just real. Their food arrived quickly, the plates steaming, the milkshakes thick and cold in tall glasses. Clara picked up her burger, sauce dripping onto the paper wrapper, and took a bite. Okay, she said with a satisfied sigh. This is officially better than anything with truffle oil. Ned laughed, the sound warm and unguarded. Finally, something we agree on without debate. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, the kind of silence that felt natural rather than strained. Then Ned set his burger down, wiping his hands on a napkin. Clara, he began, his voice steady but serious. I need to tell you something. She set her food down too, sensing the weight in his tone. For years, I've been surrounded by people who wanted something from me. Investors, partners, women who liked the idea of me more than the person I am. And I played along, because it was easier than admitting I was lonely. He paused, meeting her eyes. But when I'm with you, I don't feel like I'm performing. I feel like myself. Clara's breath caught. She had waited, feared, even doubted if she would ever hear something like this from him. And now, here it was, spoken not at a gala or under chandeliers, but in a diner booth with ketchup bottles on the table. I don't know what you see in me, she said softly, her hands tightening around her milkshake glass. I'm not like the women in your world. I'm not polished. I trip over my own feet half the time. And after that article, her voice faltered, I can't be a headline. Ned, I won't survive that. He leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. What I see in you is honesty, humor, strength, the way you make me laugh when no one else can, the way you challenge me when everyone else just agrees. That's worth more than every headline combined. Clara felt her throat tighten. She wanted to believe him. Part of her already did. But another part held back, wounded by the memory of whispers and flashing cameras. Why now, she asked finally. Why me? Because, he said simply, for the first time in a long time. I feel like I'm not alone. Her eyes burned, though she forced a smile to soften the moment. That's the milkshake talking. He chuckled, shaking his head. No, that's me. Plain and simple. They lingered long after the plates were cleared, sipping the last of their milkshakes, trading small stories. Clara told him about the summer job she'd worked through college before she had to drop out waiting tables, answering phones at a mechanic's shop. Ned told her about his awkward teenage years, about the time he tried to dye his hair blonde in college and ended up orange. They laughed, and with each laugh, the wall between them crumbled. When they finally stepped outside, the night air was cool and damp. Clara wrapped her arms around herself, and Ned instinctively slipped out of his jacket, draping it over her shoulders. "You didn't have to," she murmured. "I wanted to," he replied. They stood there for a moment, under the glow of the diner's neon sign. Not CEO and secretary, not millionaire and outsider, just two people, lingering in a moment they didn't want to end. For the first time, Clara wasn't looking at the man in the suit, or the man in the headlines. She was looking at Ned, the man who ordered a vanilla milkshake, who admitted to loneliness, who laughed until tears formed in his eyes over a burger story. And she realized dangerously, wonderfully, that she liked this Ned most of all. The email arrived mid-morning. Clara had been sorting through Ned's schedule, color-coding meetings, when a subject line caught her eye: confidential cover, concept, fortune and style, fall edition. Normally, she wouldn't have opened it, but the message had been forwarded to Ned's executive account, which she managed. She clicked, her screen filled with glossy mock-ups, Ned in a tailored suit, his arm casually draped around a model in a red dress. Another model, laughing at his side, champagne glasses raised in the air. The tagline read, "Ned Harrington, the billionaire who has it all." Clara froze. Her stomach knotted as she scrolled through the concepts, one on a yacht with Ned flanked by women in shimmering gowns, another in a sleek penthouse, his hand brushing against a model's bare shoulder. The images screamed extravagance, perfection, fantasy, and she wasn't in any of it. Of course she wouldn't be. She wasn't a model. She wasn't glossy. She was the secretary, the ordinary woman in a borrowed dress who had been whispered about at a gala. But still, after all their late-night conversations, after burgers at Marty's, after he had said she made him feel like himself, how could he even consider this? The sound of footsteps made her snap the laptop shut. Ned walked in, jacket draped over his arm, a faint smile lingering from some earlier meeting. "Busy day," he asked casually. Clara swallowed hard. "I saw it." He paused, saw what the magazine. Her voice was steady, but inside she was trembling. The cover shoot, the models, all of it. Realization dawned on his face. He set his jacket on the chair. "Clara, it's just work." Her laugh was sharp, brittle. "Just work. Do you even hear yourself? They're selling you as some kind of playboy billionaire with women draped all over you. And you're fine with it." His jaw tightened. "It's not about me being fine with it. It's about the company's image. Appearances matter." Her chest ached at the word. Appearances. Always appearances. "And what about me, Ned?" she whispered. "Where does that leave me? Standing in the shadows while the world sees you surrounded by supermodels? Do you know what that looks like to everyone else?" To me, his expression faltered, but he didn't answer right away. That silence cut deeper than any argument. Clara shook her head, fighting the sting in her eyes. "You said I made you feel real. That with me, you didn't have to pretend. And now I see you ready to pose for a fantasy spread like it's nothing." "Clara, no." Her voice rose, breaking. "I can't do this. I can't keep pretending I belong in your world while you play the part they expect. I'm not a prop, Ned, and I won't be made into one by association." The words hung between them, sharp as glass. Ned stepped closer, his eyes desperate. "It's not like that. You have to believe me. That shoot means nothing. It means everything," she cut in. "Because it shows me who you still are. The man in the magazines, not the man at the diner with a milkshake, not the man who defended me at the grocery store, just the image, the performance." Her voice broke on the last word. He reached for her, but she stepped back. "I can't keep being torn in two," she whispered. "Every time I start to trust you, I'm reminded of the gulf between us. And I can't live like that." The finality in her tone made his chest constrict. He had closed billion-dollar deals with less fear than he felt in that moment. "Clara, please," she shook her head, tears slipping free now. "I'm sorry. Ned. I can't be part of this anymore. I resign." The word landed like a hammer blow. For a moment, all he could do was stare at her, his mind refusing to process it. She gathered her things, a notebook, her pen, her phone, her movements efficient, practiced, but trembling at the edges. As she reached the door, he finally found his voice. "You're walking away just like that." Her hand lingered on the handle, but she didn't turn back. "No. I'm saving myself before I disappear into your image, before I forget who I am." The door closed softly behind her. And Ned Harrington, a man who had once believed he was unshakable, stood in the middle of his office, feeling the ground beneath him splinter. For the first time in years, he wasn't afraid of losing a deal, or a title, or even his reputation. He was afraid he had just lost the only person who had ever seen him as more than all of that. The office felt colder without Clara. Ned had walked in the morning after her resignation to find her desk empty. The small potted plant she had kept by the window gone. No more scribbled notes in her looping handwriting. No more quick glances exchanged across the room. Just a hollow silence that echoed louder than any argument. He had tried to bury himself in work, but it was useless. The contracts, the forecasts, the endless meetings, none of it mattered. All he saw was the look on Clara's face when she said, "I can't be part of this anymore." That was when the email reminder popped up. Fortune and Style cover shoot, Friday, 10 scro a... He stared at the notification. The glossy mock-up still burned into his memory, the staged laughter, the champagne glasses, the models at his side. That was the image the world wanted of Ned Harrington. Smooth, untouchable, perfect. And it was the image that had cost him Clara. His hand hovered over the keyboard only a moment before he opened a blank email and began typing. Subject cover, shoot cancellation to Fortune and Style editorial board. He didn't use assistants. He didn't consult PR. He wrote it himself, each keystroke carrying the weight of finality, effective immediately. "I am withdrawing from the planned cover shoot. The proposed concepts do not represent who I am or the direction I want my company to embody. Harrington Technologies will no longer participate in campaigns that rely on empty glamour. From this point forward, we are choosing authenticity over illusion. If you wish to cover us, it will be for what we build, and the people who build it, not the staged fantasy of wealth." He signed it simply Ned Harrington, and then he hit send. The fallout began within hours. Calls flooded in from board members, investors, PR managers. His phone buzzed non-stop. "Ned, are you out of your mind? Do you realize the exposure we just lost? You can't dictate to Fortune and Style. This could tank us in international markets." But Ned remained calm. For years, he had played their game, bowing to the demands of image and optics. Today, he was done. When the board convened an emergency video call that evening, the faces on the screen were tight with disapproval. "You can't do this without consulting us." One director snapped. "I just did," Ned replied evenly. "This will be a PR nightmare." Another warned, "Then let it be." Ned said, "Better a nightmare than a lie." The silence that followed was thick with disbelief. No one had ever heard him speak like that without calculation, without compromise. Finally, one of the older board members leaned forward. "And what do you propose instead?" "Ned, you can't just cancel and expect the world to applaud." Ned's eyes sharpened. "We changed the narrative. From this point on, our campaigns will highlight the real people behind our company. The engineers, the designers, the staff who make what we do possible. No more stage perfection, no more fantasy. Just honesty, innovation with a human face." Several scoffed. One muttered, You'll never sell that. Ned's voice was quiet but firm. Watch me. The story broke the next morning. Harrington cancels. Fortune and style, cover. Chooses authenticity over glamour. The headlines exploded across business feeds, social media, and television networks. Some praised him as a visionary, a man brave enough to defy the culture of excess. Others accused him of arrogance, of sabotaging his company's brand. But Ned didn't care, because for the first time in years, the reflection staring back at him in the mirror felt like someone he recognized. 2 days later, he stood in the atrium of Harrington Technologies, facing a small camera crew. They weren't from Fortune and Style. They were from a local paper that had been covering his company since the early days. And the people standing around him weren't models. They were his employees, engineers in hoodies, administrative assistants, warehouse staff still in safety vests. This, Ned said, gesturing to them, is Harrington Technologies. Not me in a tuxedo on a yacht. Not champagne and chandeliers. Real people, real work, real innovation. That's what matters. The applause that followed wasn't thunderous, but it was genuine. He saw pride in his employees' faces, pride that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with belonging. And as the cameras clicked, Ned thought of Clara. He hadn't done this for headlines. He hadn't done it for approval. He had done it because she was right, because the man at the diner, the man who laughed over milkshakes, was the man he wanted to be. And if she ever saw these headlines, he wanted her to know he had chosen, not the image, not the fantasy, the truth. That night, as he stood once more at his window overlooking the city, his phone buzzed with another notification. A message from his PR head. We're trending. Some say you've lost your mind. Others say you've just changed the game. Ned set the phone aside. For once, he didn't care what the world thought. All that mattered was what she thought, and whether he was too late to prove it. The library was quiet in that way. Only evening libraries could be pages turning softly. Muted footsteps on the carpet, the occasional creak of an old wooden chair. Clara sat at a table near the back, a notebook open beside a thick textbook. Her pen moved slowly across the page. Though her mind wandered, she had started night classes again, trying to pick up where life had once forced her to stop. It felt good to be moving forward, to be reclaiming something of her own. And yet, she couldn't quite silence the ache that lived in the edges of her thoughts. Every time her phone buzzed, a part of her expected hoped it would be Ned. Every night she told herself she was done, that she had chosen the safer path. But in her dreams, he was there smiling across a diner booth, standing by her side at the lake, steady and unshakable. She shook her head, willing the distraction away, when a shadow fell across her table. She looked up. Ned Harrington stood there, tall and slightly out of place among the rows of books. He wore no suit tonight, just a navy sweater and dark jeans. His hair was a little tousled, as if he had run his hands through it a dozen times before finding the courage to walk in. "Hi," he said softly. Clara's pen stilled. Her heart skipped, then raced, though she tried to keep her expression calm. "What are you doing here? I needed to see you," he admitted. She glanced around at the silent tables, the students hunched over their notes. "This isn't exactly your usual scene." A small smile tugged at his lips. "You'd be surprised. I've spent a lot of time reading lately." Clara arched a brow. "Business magazines don't count." "Not magazines," he said, pulling out a chair across from her. "Books about leadership, history, even a little poetry." He hesitated, then added, "Trying to remember who I am without the headlines." Her throat tightened. She forced herself to look back at her notes. "You didn't come here to talk about books." "No," he said. "I came to apologize." The words landed heavy, but not unwelcome. "I canceled the shoot," he continued, his voice steady. "And I told the board no more glossy images, no more pretending. From now on, we're telling real stories. The people who build our company, the truth, it's already causing waves." Clara's pen slipped from her fingers. She looked up, her eyes searching his face. "You did that?" "Yes," he said simply. "Because you were right. I've spent too long living as an image, but I don't want to be that man anymore. Not for them, not for you. Emotion swelled in her chest, unexpected and sharp. She had imagined apologies, imagined him showing up at her door with flowers or expensive promises. She had never imagined this a choice that cost him something real. Still, she folded her arms, her voice cautious. And what? You think one grand gesture fixes everything? Ned shook his head. No, I don't think it's that simple. I know I hurt you. I let appearances matter more than the truth, and you paid the price for it. I can't erase that. All I can do is show you I've changed, not by words, but by the way I live from now on. Clara wanted to believe him. God. She wanted to, but the fear still lingered, sharp as glass. You don't get it, she whispered. That article. Those whispers, it wasn't just about you. It was about me. They turned me into a punchline, a nobody who got too close to the billionaire, and I can't go through that again. Ned's expression softened, his eyes full of quiet pain. Clara, I can't promise the world won't talk. But I can promise this, you'll never face it alone. Not again. If they come after you, they'll have to go through me first. Her breath caught. It wasn't the words themselves, it was the way he said them, steady, unwavering, not the grand vows of a man trying to impress, but the plain promise of someone who meant every syllable. The silence stretched between them, thick with everything unspoken. Clara looked down at her notebook, at the half-finished sentences she had been writing. Then she looked back at him. You showing up here? It's different, she admitted softly. You're not the man from the magazines right now. You're just you. That's all I want to be, Ned said. Just me. With you. Her defenses trembled. She searched his face, looking for cracks, for any sign of pretense. All she found was sincerity. Finally, she sighed, a long exhale that carried days of tension with it. I'm not saying yes to anything yet, she warned. I'm still figuring out what I want, who I want to be. He nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. Then, let me walk with you while you figure it out. No pressure, no demands, just one step at a time. Clara's lips curved, almost against her will. The phrase echoed their walk by the lake, the moment she had first glimpsed the man behind the mask. One step at a time, she repeated softly. For the first time in weeks, her chest felt lighter. They sat in silence then, surrounded by the scent of old books and the quiet hum of pages turning. Clara picked up her pen, and Ned leaned back, watching her with a kind of reverence that made her cheeks warm. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, not yet, but it was a beginning, and for now, that was enough. The drive into the Cascades stretched for hours, winding roads pulling them farther from the city's clamor and deeper into quiet wilderness. Clara watched from the passenger seat, the tall evergreens blurring past, their tips brushing a sky painted with early evening gold. She had hesitated when Ned first suggested it, a cabin, just the two of them. It sounded like the setup for one of those glossy weekend getaways she'd seen splashed across magazines. But he'd smiled and said, it's not what you think. No luxury, no champagne, just space to breathe, and maybe a campfire. Now, as the tires crunched on gravel and the cabin came into view, she realized he had meant every word. It was small, weathered, tucked between trees like it had grown there. Smoke curled from a chimney, and a stack of firewood leaned against the side. No glimmer of chandeliers, no polished marble floors, just a wooden porch with a rocking chair and the faint creak of the wind through pine branches. Clara stepped out, the air crisp against her skin, scented with cedar and earth. This is different. Good different. I hope, Ned said, carrying their bags inside. She followed him in. The interior was simple, a stone fireplace, a small table with mismatched chairs, quilts folded neatly on a worn sofa, the kind of place that whispered of quiet winters and slow mornings. I used to come here with my dad, Ned said, setting the bags down. His voice carried a softness she rarely heard. We'd spend weekends chopping wood, hiking trails. He said this was where a man remembered who he was, away from the noise. Clara turned, studying him. "And do you remember?" He met her gaze, a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. "I'm starting to." That night, they built a fire outside. Flames licked at the logs, sparks drifting up to meet the stars. Clara pulled a blanket tighter around her shoulders, the chill of the mountain night biting at the edges of the warmth. Ned sat beside her, a mug of cocoa in his hands. No wine glasses, no silver spoons, just chipped ceramic mugs filled with something simple, sweet. "This is the first time I've seen you without the city at your back," Clara said, staring into the fire. And I like it," she admitted, smiling faintly. "You look less like Ned Harrington, CEO, and more like just Ned." He finished for her. She nodded. Just Ned. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the crackle of the fire and the distant call of an owl. Above them, the sky stretched wide and endless, a scatter of stars so bright it felt like standing beneath eternity. Clara tilted her head back, awed. "I'd forgotten what the sky really looks like when you get away from the city. My dad used to say every star was a reminder of how small we are," Ned said softly. "But that it's not a bad thing. Being small means we're part of something bigger." She glanced at him, her heart tugging at the tenderness in his tone. It was moments like this that undid her the raw edges of him, the honesty. "Ned," she began, her voice quieter than the fire's crackle. "Why me?" He turned to her, brows furrowing slightly. "You could have anyone," she continued. "Models, actresses, women who fit into your world without raising questions. And yet, you chose me, the secretary who brings you homemade birthday cakes and teases you about forgetting milk." His eyes didn't waver, "Because those women never saw me." "Not really. They saw the man in the magazines. You saw the man who couldn't figure out a coffee order, the man who still misses his dad, the man who laughs when he shouldn't." Her breath caught. "You don't make me feel like I have to perform," he said, voice steady. "You make me feel like myself, and I love you for that." "Clara." The words landed like a spark in her chest, igniting something she had tried so hard to contain. She stared at him, her heart pounding. For weeks she had battled her feelings, afraid of being swallowed by his world, afraid of losing herself. But here, under the stars, with nothing between them but firelight and honesty, she felt safe. "I love you too," she whispered. The confession slipped out, fragile and unstoppable, and once it was spoken, it filled the night air like music. Ned's breath trembled as he reached for her hand, his fingers brushing hers before lacing together. The warmth of his touch spread through her, grounding her more than the blanket ever could. Their eyes met, and for a long, suspended moment, neither moved. The fire crackled, a log collapsed into glowing embers. The stars burned silently above. Then, slowly, Ned leaned closer. Clara's heart hammered, but she didn't pull away. She tilted her face toward him, her eyes fluttering shut just as his lips brushed hers. It was soft at first, tentative, reverent. The kind of kiss that wasn't about passion, but about recognition. About two souls meeting in the quiet of the night. Her hand rose, almost of its own will, to rest against his cheek, feeling the warmth of his skin beneath her fingertips. When they pulled apart, she was breathless, her forehead resting against his. Not bad for a man who couldn't even order coffee, she teased, her voice shaky but laced with laughter. He chuckled, his thumb brushing gently against her hand. "I'll take that as high praise." They sat together like that, wrapped in firelight and each other, the weight of their confession still hanging in the air, but no longer heavy. Instead, it felt freeing, like the first step into a future neither of them had dared to imagine until now. And under the vast canopy of stars, with the mountains standing guard in the distance, Clara realized that love didn't need chandeliers or headlines. Sometimes, it just needed two people, a fire, and the courage to finally speak the truth. The first light of morning crept over the ridge, painting the sky in strokes of rose and gold. The mountains, still shrouded in mist, seemed to hold their breath as dawn unfolded. Clara stood on the cabin's porch, wrapped in a quilt, a mug of steaming coffee in her hands. Her hair was tousled from sleep, her cheeks flushed with the chill of the high-altitude air. She had woken early, unable to resist the pull of the quiet morning, the promise of seeing the world awaken. Ned emerged moments later, carrying something small in his pocket, though his expression gave nothing away. He joined her on the porch, his sweater hanging loosely on his frame, his eyes still heavy with sleep but glowing in the soft light. "Morning," he murmured, brushing his hand gently across her back as he stepped beside her. "Morning," she replied, her voice hushed, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile beauty of the scene. They stood together, silent, watching as the sun broke fully over the peaks, spilling light into the valley below. It was the kind of sight that made words feel unnecessary until Ned spoke. "Clara," he began, his voice steadier than he felt. She turned, her brows lifting slightly at the gravity in his tone. "I used to think life was about having everything lined up. Money, success, appearances. I thought if I checked all the boxes, I'd feel whole. But I was wrong." He swallowed, searching her eyes. "None of it mattered. Not really. Not until you—" Her breath caught, and her grip on the mug tightened. Ned reached into his pocket, pulling out a small box, simple and unadorned. He opened it to reveal a modest ring, a white gold band, set with a single diamond, elegant in its simplicity. Clara's eyes widened, tears already stinging before he had even spoken the words. "I don't need a perfect life," Ned said, his voice low but unwavering. "I just need a true one. With you." The world seemed to still. The fire crackled faintly inside the cabin. The mountains stood sentinel. The sky blazed with morning light. But all Clara saw was him kneeling there, stripped of pretense, offering not wealth or image, but himself. Her throat tightened as the tears spilled over. She set her mug carefully on the railing before covering her mouth with trembling hands. "Ned," she whispered, her voice breaking. He took a slow breath, his eyes never leaving hers. "I love you. Not the way I've said those words before. Not as something fleeting or convenient. I love you in the way that changes me, in the way that makes me want to wake up to mornings like this, with you beside me, for the rest of my life." Clara's heart felt like it might burst. She had feared this moment, imagined it with doubt, convinced herself it would never come. And yet, here it was real, honest, undeniable. "Yes." She breathed, the words slipping out before she could stop it. Ned blinked, his lips parting as if he hadn't dared believe she would answer so quickly. "Yes," she repeated, firmer now, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. "Yes, Ned, 1,000 times. Yes." He exhaled a shaky laugh, relief and joy colliding in his chest as he rose to his feet. His hands trembled only slightly as he slid the ring onto her finger, the diamond catching the first rays of sunlight. Clara looked down at it, at the way it gleamed in the morning light, then back at him. "It's perfect," she whispered. "It's simple," he corrected gently. "Like us. No performances, no headlines, just real." She threw her arms around him then, pulling him close, her face pressed against his shoulder as she sobbed with a joy so fierce it frightened her. Ned held her tightly, his hand cradling the back of her head, his eyes closing as he buried his face in her hair. For a long moment, they stayed like that, wrapped in each other, the mountains their witnesses. When they finally pulled back, Clara cupped his face in her hands. Her eyes were still wet, but her smile shone through. "You know this doesn't solve everything, right? Life won't magically get easy." "I know," Ned said, his thumb brushing her cheek. "But, for the first time, I don't want easy. I want true, whatever that looks like." Her laughter broke through the tears, soft and luminous. God help us then. God help us, he echoed, smiling, before kissing her. It was different from the kiss by the fire, deeper, stronger, fueled not just by longing, but by promise. A seal on the words they had spoken, the commitment they had made. When they finally broke apart, Clara rested her forehead against his, her breath still unsteady. I never thought I'd end up here, she admitted. With you, in a cabin, saying yes to forever. Ned chuckled, his arm tightening around her waist. Neither did I, but I can't imagine it any other way now. The sun climbed higher, bathing them in light. The quilt slipped from Clara's shoulders, but she didn't notice. She was warm, warmer than she had ever been, not from the fire, not from the dawn, but from the certainty that for all the fear and doubt, they had found something worth holding on to. And as they stood there on that mountain porch, ring glinting, hearts bare, they knew this was not an ending. This was the beginning. The day was unremarkable by the world's standards. No gala lights, no photographers waiting outside, no champagne flutes raised in crystal halls. The sun was just setting over Seattle, streaking the sky with a wash of amber and lavender as Edward Ned Harrington parked his car in a small lot beside a brick building that most people drove past without a second glance. The sign read, North Seattle Community Learning Center. Clara squeezed his hand as they walked toward the entrance together. She wore jeans and a light sweater, her hair tied back, her face bare of makeup. Beside her, Ned was dressed simply two-flannel shirt, worn leather jacket, sneakers. There was no attempt at disguise, no performance, just two people, side by side, inside. The halls buzzed with quiet anticipation. Adults of every age, some carrying notebooks, some balancing jobs and children, moved toward classrooms labeled Intro to Literature, Algebra 2, Public Speaking. The air smelled faintly of pencil shavings and burnt coffee from the vending machine. Clara stopped outside a room where a small sign read, College Prep, Reigniting Your Path. This is it, she whispered, her voice trembling with both nerves and pride. Ned smiled, brushing a stray strand of hair from her cheek. Ready? She nodded, though her eyes glistened. I didn't think I'd ever come back here. I told myself it was too late, that life had already passed me by. And yet, here you are, Ned said softly. Not too late at all. They entered the classroom. Rows of battered desks faced a chalkboard where a woman in her 50s was writing the evening's lesson. Clara signed her name on the roster, her hand shaking slightly. Ned stood back, watching with quiet reverence, as if witnessing a sacred act. When she returned to him, he handed her a folder. She frowned, curious, and opened it. Inside was a thick packet of papers stamped with the Harrington Foundation's seal. "What's this?" she asked, her brow furrowed. "It's the beginning of something I should have started a long time ago," Ned replied. "A scholarship fund. For students who never had the chance to finish their education. For people like you, hardworking, determined, deserving of more than the world ever offered them." Clara's lips parted in shock. Ned. The Harrington Scholarship for Opportunity. He continued, his voice steady. "It's not about my name, though. It's about creating doors where there were only walls. And I want you to sit on the board. Clara. I want your voice shaping it, because this wasn't my idea. It was yours. Every time you talked about the kids who couldn't afford books, or the single mom who wanted to go back to school, I just listened." Her throat tightened. She pressed the folder to her chest, tears threatening to spill. "You don't have to." "I do," he interrupted gently. "Not to prove anything, not for appearances, but because I finally understand that wealth means nothing if it doesn't lift someone else. And because this is the life I want, with you, hand in hand, building something real." Clara exhaled, shaky and overwhelmed. For all the times she had doubted, for all the moments she had wondered if Ned was trapped by the image of his old life here, was her answer. She didn't need the spotlight, neither did he. What mattered was this: a man once obsessed with magazine covers, standing in a community classroom, his hand wrapped around hers. investing not in vanity, but in possibility. The instructor called the class to order. Students settled in, flipping open notebooks. Clara glanced at Ned, uncertainty flickering. "You don't have to wait with me," she whispered. "This might be boring." Ned chuckled softly. Clara Mitchell. "I've sat through corporate board meetings that lasted 6 hours. I can handle college prep 101. Her laugh broke through the tension, light and free. So, they sat together in the back row, side by side at a scuffed wooden desk, like two students beginning again. Clara took notes diligently, her pen scratching against the paper. Ned listened too, though his eyes often drifted to her, her concentration, her determination, the spark that had drawn him from the very beginning. By the time class ended, the night had fallen, the parking lot bathed in the glow of street lamps. They walked out hand in hand, their steps slow, unhurried. Clara looked up at him, her breath visible in the cool air. "You realize this isn't glamorous, right? No red carpets, no headlines, just night classes and scholarship paperwork." Ned squeezed her hand, his smile quiet but sure. "Good. Glamour fades, headlines vanish. But this what we're building, it lasts." She stopped, forcing him to face her. The emotion in her eyes was raw, unguarded. "You've really changed." He shook his head. "No, you just reminded me who I was before I lost myself. You gave me back my truth." For a moment, silence wrapped around them. The hum of a distant streetlight, the laughter of a student nearby, the ordinary sounds of an ordinary night. Then Clara leaned her head against his shoulder, exhaling deeply. "Maybe that's what love really is," she murmured, "not fireworks or fairy tales, just walking into classrooms together, daring to start over." Ned pressed a kiss to her hair. "Exactly." As they crossed the lot, heading toward the car, Clara's hand tightened around his. Her ring caught the light, glinting briefly before disappearing into shadow. Not a spotlight, not a performance. Just a promise quiet, enduring, true. And that was how their story began again. Not in the pages of a magazine, but in the rows of a classroom, in the laughter between notes, in the shared resolve to build a different life. A life that was, at last, entirely their own. At its heart, this story reminds us that appearances are never the whole truth. Ned Harrington had wealth, power, and prestige, everything the world told him should make him happy. Yet his soul remained empty, because no amount of luxury can replace the need for authenticity and connection. Clara Mitchell, with her honesty and courage, revealed something simple but profound. True love is not found in perfection, but in companionship. It is in laughter over diner coffee, in quiet walks by the lake, in holding hands through uncertainty. For many of us, especially later in life, the temptation is to measure worth by titles, possessions, or the approval of others. But the real question is, who walks beside you when the spotlight fades? Who sees you not for what you have, but for who you are? This story challenges us to rethink success. Perhaps the greatest achievement is not building an empire, but building a life of truth and tenderness, one step at a time, with someone who dares to see us fully. May we all have the courage to choose authenticity over appearances and companionship over performance, because in the end, that is what lasts. Thank you so much for spending your time with Shining Stories. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like, share it with a friend who might need a little light today, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next journey we share together. Your support means the world. It helps us keep bringing you stories of hope, love, and second chances. Until next time, stay kind, stay inspired, and keep shining.